Welcome to a new episode of My Favorite Things. We just heard Synthesize Me by The Space Lady. We'll be airing an interview with Susan Dietrich, who has been performing and recording as The Space Lady since the 1980s. Dietrich began performing as The Space Lady on the streets of Boston and San Francisco in the 1980s and 1990s. Recordings that were self-produced and self-released were sold on cassette during those early street performances, and over the course of about 15 years, the Space Lady developed a cult following and attracted the attention of some popular record labels, including Castleface Records, Mississippi Records, and Night School Records. With the renewed interest in her work, the Space Lady was able to reissue her original recordings, and since 2012, she has regularly performed around the world and continues to produce and release new music. With that, let's jump right into our interview with the Space Lady, Susan Dietrich, here on KUZU. You grew up in a family that was immersed in classical music. What kind of effect did those early influences have on you?
My mother was the local music teacher, both in the school system and privately. She taught piano, that is. And she was quite an accomplished pianist and just innately gifted. And my dad was a violist. And they performed up and down the Arkansas Valley, up to Pueblo and back down to Los Animas, our hometown. And we're renowned in the area of Colorado that we lived in. I guess it was in like 1957. They tuned in to a TV program, and it was an opera written for television. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, called Amal and the Night Visitors by Giancarlo Menotti. And it was such an endearing, heartwarming, and engaging story about a little lame peasant shepherd boy, and that just grabbed my heartstrings and pulled. My brother and sister and I ultimately memorized the whole score, and we would perform it all season long, summer, fall, winter, spring. Never mind, it was a Christmas story.
All right, well, let's listen to some of those early influences. Starting out, here's a tune from Amal and the Night Visitors. This is Shepherd's Dance.
Beethoven, as a rule, did not give names to his sonatas, but this is one of a few exceptions. He called it the Pathétique, named for the tragic opening chords of the first movement.
We just listened to Christine Dietrich, mother of the Space Lady, Susan Dietrich, with her rendition of Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 8. Before that, Amal and the Night Visitors with Shepherd's Dance, both tunes that were early influences on the Space Lady's creative development. If you're just joining us, we're featuring an interview with Susan Dietrich, also known as the Space Lady. We're going to get right back into that interview along with more music on the way here on tonight's episode of My Favorite Things on KUZU. So you became interested in rock and roll and other popular music that was burgeoning in the 1960s, and you moved from your small hometown in Colorado into the city of Boulder to pursue those interests. What was that experience like for you?
I have to mention how I broke away from classical music under my parents' roof, how that was permitted. And that was because someone gave us an album by Richard Dyer Bennett. And he's very obscure, but oh my goodness, he so influenced me. I mean, that led me into folk music, and that led me into, Joan Baez and Judy Collins, and then Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan led me into rock. So Richard Dyer Bennett was my breakaway moment from, just the stuffy single-mindedness of a classical diet and nothing else. I somehow thought CU Boulder would be the best place for me to hook up with the hippie community that, was spawned out of that music. And so having really no academic skills to speak of, let alone social skills, having grown up in a tiny little cow town in the middle of nowhere, music was the only thing I looked at. I didn't inquire about what courses were offered or what I might be interested in majoring in, or what my course of studies should be to develop a major. All I wanted to know was what kind of music is the going thing, and Boulder just seemed to be the centrifuge of it all. So that's why I landed in Boulder.
Let's take a listen to some of that early folk and rock music that has been an influence on the Space Lady. We'll start out with Richard Dyer Bennett and his recording of Froggy Went A-Courting.
Frog went a-courting, he did right.
You are listening to My Favorite Things here on KUZU. During today's episode, we are featuring an interview with recording artist The Space Lady. We just heard a set of music that was influential to the Space Lady during her formative years in the Boulder, Colorado 1960s. We had Joan Baez with Here's to You, Nicola, and Bart. That was her tribute to a pair of Italian anarchists from the 1920s. We also heard Judy Collins with Farewell to Tarwathie, her take on a traditional folk song that features her in a duet with humpback whales. We started off the set with another one of the Space Lady's early folk influences, Richard Dyer Bennett with Froggy Went A-Courting. Thanks again for tuning in to My Favorite Things tonight. We're here every Friday, 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. Let's jump right back into our interview with Susan Dietrich, the Space Lady.
My sister happened to have gone to San Francisco to join the Peace Corps in 1967. And so I ended up dropping out of college and going out there to visit her, having no idea what was going on in the Haight-Ashbury district, and found myself just swept up in the milieu of hippie culture, and again, having really a wannabe. I wanted to be a part of it so much. It took me years to get a foothold and get some sense of self. I ended up hitchhiking back and forth from San Francisco to Colorado a couple of times. My hippie girlfriend, and I got picked up by none other than Joel, who became my future husband of 30 years. So I was just literally hitching through life.
You meet Joel, the two of you moved to Boston, is that right? And is this where you first began performing as the Space Lady?
73 to 84 we were in Boston. And that's where I got my start as a street musician. Joel put together a little 4-piece band that we named, and I belonged to it. I played an electronic organ, a Vox Jaguar. And he played his guitar, and we had a drummer and another guy who played clarinet, I think. It was a real jury-rigged type of band. And the name Blind Juggler pretty much describes what we were doing, really feeling our way in the dark with just ambient music and noise. And we played at a club in Boston in Kenmore Square called the Rathskeller. But down in the basement of the Rathskeller was a punk club called the Rat. So that was my first public performance, I think, as a member of Blind Juggler.
All right, well, let's listen to some early Space Lady recordings. Here's the Space Lady with her version of Pete Schilling's Major Tom. Thanks for tuning in to My Favorite Things here on KUZU. If you're just joining us, we're listening to an interview with Susan Dietrich, an artist also known as the Space Lady. We just heard the Space Lady with her version of Pete Schilling's Major Tom. Let's jump right back into our interview with Susan Dietrich, the Space Lady. Along with some originals by you and your husband Joel, the early Space Lady recordings include many covers of popular songs from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. What is it about songs like Major Tom, Strawberry Fields Forever, Born to Be Wild, and Hound Dog that attracted you to reinterpreting them in your own style?
And usually I look for good lyrics and usually a positive message. And if that's accompanied by a nice melody and great chord changes and a good beat, that's pretty much all it takes. It also helps if it's a song that I know really well, that I've heard a million times.
The last 10 years has seen your music gain a wider appreciation among audiences worldwide. You've been performing around the world and releasing new music. I wonder, what are some of the recent discoveries you've made in the contemporary music scene that you're now a part of?
John Miles. I guess he's pretty well known, at least in outsider music circles. People mention him all the time. I first heard of him when my night school record producer told me he's a big fan of mine. Back in January, I reconnected with an old friend from San Francisco, and he's been immersing himself in punk. So he's trying to educate me, and I'm eating it up. I'm learning about the whole punk movement. Better late than never, but now that I really see how I can identify with those younger kids, they were the hippies of their day. And I may not have the tattoos or piercings, or certainly not the spiked leather. In my heart of hearts, I am a renegade. I am a contrarian. I am a punk. So I've been listening to Garbage, Pixies, Kelly and Kim Deal, the twin sisters who are part of the Pixies, and not Garbage. The Breeders, that's it, yeah.
It's great to see the trajectory of your influences going from classical through folk, rock, and pop of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all the way up into the more recent punk rock and independent music from the 90s and 2000s. We'll use this next set to hear some of those more recent influences. Starting out, here's John Mouse with Touchdown from 2017's Screen Memories.
You go, baby, go, go. Oh, we're right behind you. This reggae song.
You're tuned in to My Favorite Things here on KUZU. Tonight, we've been featuring an interview with Susan Dietrich, also known as the Space Lady. We just heard a set of music by artists from the 90s and 2000s that the Space Lady has been listening to recently. Those included songs by The Breeders, The Pixies, Garbage, and John Mouse. Thanks again for joining us. We're going to jump back into our interview with the Space Lady now, here on My Favorite Things. Being that you lived through one of the most iconic and sometimes tumultuous periods of the social and cultural history of the United States during the 1960s, I'm wondering what your perspective is in regards to how that past time compares to what you're experiencing as a contemporary performance artist touring around the world to audiences of all ages here in the year 2019.
Well, there's so much of a common thread of being afraid for not just our individual lives, but for the entire planet. Because we were afraid, nuclear war was a reality in our everyday, at least subconsciously, we were always thinking the whole world could blow up, and what do we do? And the best thing we can do is promote love and peace. And however naive it was, it's all we had to go on, and it's still all we have to go on. There's not a lot, one individual can do to change the trajectory. And yet, there's so much hope and love and joy still alive. It seems like it's vastly overpowered and outweighed by all the horror we're seeing every day. And yet when it emerges, it's so strong and so real and so delightful and overwhelmingly positive that you have to fabricate some hope out of it.
Well, thank you for that optimistic perspective on things. I think it's a perspective that can be felt in your music. And speaking of your music, what are your future plans?
I'm moving forward musically, and I have plans to do a bunch of covers of punk songs, if I can pick and choose the ones I want to do. Learning to play guitar, so I may come out with a guitar album. Oh, there's a guitar song, an original, in fact. It's probably the best song I ever wrote. It's called Oh Brave New World, and it's quite a message I'd like people to hear. The 4 verses are pretty much an appeal, a plea to save the planet. And no more fracking, no more drilling, no more borders, no more walls. No more killing.
Why don't we end our show tonight with a live performance of this song? But before we do that, I want to thank our guest, Susan Dietrich, aka the Space Lady, for sharing her story and her music with us. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode of My Favorite Things. We are here every week, Friday, 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. on KUZU. Here's the Space Lady closing out tonight's episode with an exclusive live performance of Brave New World.
When did we lose our heart's connection and take for granted all the earth has known? Did we not hear her strong objection to our idea her body could be yours? brave, oh brave new world. How could we lose our high connection and turn our backs on life in all its forms? Water protector, your fierce objection has warned us of the coming deadly storm. No more borders, no more war, no more warfare, no more hate, no more drilling, no more fracking, no more killing. Just wait. Oh, brave, oh, brave, oh, brave you are. Oh, brave, oh, brave, oh, brave you are. Oh, brave, oh, brave, oh, brave you are. Oh, brave. Oh, brave you was. Now is the time for deep reflection. Let tears of sorrow wash away your pain. River of love, give us direction. Let joyful voices sing a new refrain. Cleanse the water, cleanse the air. Loving action heals despair. See the forest, desert too, rolling meadow, lake of blue. Cleanse the river, stream and bay. Loving action is the way. Busy cities, lonely towns, in all corners life abounds. Join together, friend and foe, we have nowhere else to go. Oh, brave, oh, brave, oh, brave you are. Oh, brave, oh, brave, oh, brave you are. Oh, brave, oh, brave, oh, brave you are. Oh,